Testing, testing, testing. Blah, 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 blah.
Ready, set, go.
It's time for the Coach Amy and Coach Liz show.
A podcast for endurance athletes by two athletes, two coaches, and a physical therapist.
We are your hosts, Coach Amy
And Coach Liz.
coming to you from
Kansas City.
Hello, peeps. We're back for another episode of the Coach Amy and Coach Liz show. I have a funny story about goggles.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, so
Tell me at least, are you
What?
wearing... Well,
What?
sometimes I know you like to wear your swim goggles for safety reasons in your
No,
house.
no. This is not to protect my eyes from debris in a tornado.
Okay.
This is for swimming. Okay, but so I went through like my first pair of goggles is like kids goggles from Walmart, like little Speedo, because that's what fits my face. Okay, and they work so great. And since then, I have purchased many different different brands, fancy mirror goggles, all the different kind of fancy things, and none of them work. They all fill up with water. I mean, do all the things. So I still have this trusty little Speedo pair. I swear the rubber is gonna like crack and break eventually. But my first triathlon was the what you trained me, you helped me. It was
Win?
Yes, Win for Casey. And I was standing there fidgeting with everything, and snap, they broke. And because of course they were like really, really cheap, you know? And one of the Reds gals was standing there. I'm like, oh my God, my goggles are broken. Like we can't get in. She took it, she tied it in a knot, and we put it back on my head, and that knot is still in there. And I still
Oh, you still have them?
I still have them. I still wear them. We should take a picture of them for this.
Oh, we should.
episode.
And the rubber hasn't totally disintegrated?
Not yet.
That's
But
amazing.
of course, it's not like I swim every day.
But that makes it
Either.
even worse. I feel like then because it sits in there with like the chlorine on it and it just eats like, it'll like, if you go back and let your swim stuff sit and you go back later, it's like all, like it eats your bathing suits. And
Yeah, that's
goggles
true.
and your caps.
They are still in play.
Wow.
I know. But we were casting about some topic I can't even remember, and you mentioned these like smart goggles or something like that, and I'm so curious to learn more about that, and I think our listeners might want to hear about this.
So we'll talk about some of the smart goggles. I'm going to say a few things first.
Okay.
I think that people get very obsessed about goggles, and I was a swimmer growing up, right? And when I was growing up, back in my day, I mean, you went like there was one store in town you could buy goggles, and there was like maybe two different selections. There were, and I mean that changed a little bit, but at this point there are like an insane amount of goggles to pick from, and people get totally neurotic about it. And I mean, the cost of goggles is just like blows my mind. The goggles need to not leak. Mm-hmm. They need to be comfortable on your face and not give you a headache because you have to pull them so tight so that the water can't get in. Those are the two main things. I hear lots of different things about fog, about how goggles fog, and that, maybe you put your spit in the goggles and that helps prevent the fogging, that there's goggle sprays that you can buy different types that are anti-fog. And I get, as a lifelong swimmer and triathlon coach for over 15 years, I get a lot of mixed feedback about how well any of that stuff actually works. Mm-hmm. So, when do I use anything for fog? I don't. I will sometimes actually just stop in a race real quick and wipe my goggles with my hands and keep going, because you need to be able to see the buoys where you're going. And I have not found anything at this point as a coach where I'm like, this for sure is going to work to keep your goggles from fogging. So my point in saying this is that, if you are new to the triathlon community and you're trying to figure out goggles and it just seems like it's a ridiculous feat, that's because it's just gotten really overwhelming. And the bottom line is you need a pair of goggles that fit your face, don't give you a headache, and that don't cost $1 million.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start with that.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to talk. So those, that's sort of my high horse about goggles. But what you were mentioning is goggles that now will show you in the corner, or they'll reflect on the lens your pace in the water. So they communicate with your watch, which is tracking your pace in the water. or some of them do. Some of them, anyway, you can, so while you're swimming, you can see your pace. So, that, let's break that down a little bit. Like, first, I want to talk about like what we're doing with pace. And this, is true in any sport, but for swimming especially, there are two ways you can work with pace. One, you can improve your pace, obviously. The other thing, which is critical in swimming, is that you can maintain your pace for less effort. And that is not the shiny one that people want, but especially for like distance triathlon, that is extremely important. It affects the bike and it affects the run afterwards. And building up the ability, again, I work with athletes that are mostly doing half and full Ironmans. And so, that is a swim that is 1.2 to 2.4 miles. And depending on how fast a swimmer is, that can take anywhere from like, you can have somebody in the water that's in the water from anywhere from 30 minutes to over 2 hours. So it's a long time to be swimming. So to be able to get your fitness to a point where you're able to hold that same pace for that long amount of time at a much diminished amount of effort is extremely important, not just for your swim, but for the rest of your race. So I just want to put that out there because I think we start getting goggles with paces on them and people get really excited about trying to like lower that pace without really thinking about what do you need from your swim fitness. So you need to be clear about that.
Yeah.
And so, the thing about swimming is that you can be working much harder and actually be going slower or certainly not be going any faster. And we've talked about this in other podcasts, and it's because your stroke becomes very inefficient and you're not moving any water, but you're moving your limbs. And so you're sliding through the water and you're kicking like a maniac and it's making your breath and your heart rate go up, but it is not moving you forward. So one of the things that, I feel like there's two things that can be really helpful with the, with seeing your pace in your goggles, especially for people who are new. And one of them is if you are learning a new technique or you're working to improve a technique, it does give you the ability to kind of keep track of like, is this affecting my pace? And again, it can affect your pace. Like maybe you're going the same pace for less energy. Maybe it's actually improving your pace, but it does give you some good, legitimate, objective feedback about that. Now I will say that you need to be able to be practicing a drill and be proficient in it enough that you can do the drill and still be paying attention to, right? Because if you are so like, I think people really forget the importance of, you have to be able to connect your brain and the movement, and doing that, especially when you're trying to like breathe and your face is in the water, takes an enormous amount of focus. And to be trying to do that and doing it correctly and watching that time is something that you're probably not going to be able to just jump in with a new drill and do. But eventually, like you kind of master the drill, you ignore the time, but eventually you can bring that piece in, and it can be very helpful to see like, is this something that is helping me actually improve my time? And then you can kind of tweak your form, and like if I move my hand like this, does it give you any feedback about your time, which is extremely valuable because what else do you have, especially when you're swimming by yourself? And most triathletes, like you may swim in a master's group, but masters isn't always really you don't get a lot of great feedback in masters because there's just too much going on, and you don't necessarily know that the masters coaches knows what a triathlon swimmer needs. There's lots of things. So that's a good thing. The other place that I see it as hugely beneficial is that once you get in and you want to build your fitness for swimming, and especially, for triathlon swimming, where you're doing longer distance events, what tends to happen with people, so when I was coaching swimming and like we had somebody get in for a meet, we take splits. And so if somebody's doing like a 500-yard swim or 1,000 or a mile, like I'm writing down their 50 and their 100 splits all the way through. So I can see their little like micro splits. It would be like, a runner going out and doing a 5K on the track and taking your 400-meter splits every time, right? Mm-hmm. And you can see like, do they start out too fast? What happens in the middle? Do they pick it up at the end? Like it gives you a lot of information about how they're pacing, which is very hard to do on your own in the pool without some kind of feedback, right? And so like as a swimmer, I will look up on the clock and I will see like I know where my split should be for 100, 200, 300 all the way through 1,000. Like I can track that. But I don't think that's really a reasonable request for most triathletes. It's just too much. So to have that, to be able to see your pace as you're going through a harder set, allows you then to not slack off, right? Because if you're doing 1,000, it is hard to stay focused. It's hard to stay focused, and people zone off, they get tired, and you don't have anything to hold you accountable because there's no time. So if you have that and you're like, well, I'm going to swim 1,000, you know, and you get to see that your first 100s are each at like, you know, 155 per 100. And then you notice as you get to the middle of your 1,000, now you're at 210. Well, it really gives you something to work towards. And so it can really help you build that fitness because you are able to have something that's like, so, track your effort.
Yeah, and that 210 or that slowing down might not be because you actually were getting tired, but it was just because you lost focus.
It's often not because you're tired.
Right.
And that is a really key, like you have to learn how to focus all the way through a set like that, and that's a really key. And so I feel like for that reason, those goggles are extremely helpful. And then, you know, I mean, using them in a race, I think, you know, would also allow that. And it you know, there's some ways that would translate to a race that can be really, really helpful too, because it just gives you accountability that you don't have. And so I do think there's, you know, they can be hugely beneficial. You just want to be clear on why you're using them and when it's appropriate, and not forego like the other parts of swimming that you really needed to work on and develop outside of just watching that pace.
Yeah.
So,
and it sounds like it probably isn't something that a new swimmer or someone new to the sport needs to really invest in. It sounds like wait.
I think I would wait. Yeah. I think it's too much. It's just like, I feel like, you know, people want to get in and do so much in swimming right away, which is great. Like, that's how we are. And, you know, you can do that on the bike and it's all this stuff, but it will backfire in swimming because swimming is kind of an asshole. It is. So be patient and introduce the things as you feel ready, so that you don't, if you're going into the water and you're feeling overwhelmed, you need to pull back and like be like, what can I do where I don't feel overwhelmed, but I'm still making progress.
Yes. Great information, Liz.
Okay. Thanks so much for listening. And remember,
we are in this together. Until next time.